Hello, I'm Maria Ressa. It's been nearly a month since Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished. Malaysia's Prime Minister Najib Razak announced that satellite analysis showed the missing jet ended at the southern Indian Ocean. But some families refused to accept Najib's statement, saying they want and they need hard evidence. Until today, though, hard evidence is elusive. Debris found in the area was not from the plane. Time is running out, as the pings from the flight recorder's beacons will stop after the batteries lose power in just a few days. Joining us in the studio is aviation security specialist Philip Baum. He is visiting Manila. He was just in for the Protect conference, which we just did this week. He'll share his analysis of what happened, where are things going, and what about security? How did the airlines handle this crisis? What are lessons learned? Thank you for coming to join us here in Rappler.
My pleasure.
You've been in aviation security for a very long time. What are the lessons learned from this?
Well, obviously, until we actually find the wreckage of this aircraft, or by some miracle we actually find the aircraft intact, we're not going to really know the true lessons. But already there are a number of things that we can identify. Let's go right back to the beginning of the crisis. Please. Sort of 2 days into it, we found that there were a number of passengers that had boarded that aircraft with passports that did not belong to them.
Yes.
And Interpol has made it absolutely clear that they have got a database of 40 million documents reported lost or stolen, and yet airlines are not able to access that database. They're not accessing it at this moment in time. Those passengers should have been prevented from getting on board the aircraft. And it's simply just the way that the aviation industry works at the moment that prevents that happening, because screeners at airports do not have any information about the passengers that they're screening at all. And airlines can't access the Interpol database.
So what do you recommend to make that work?
Well, I think that there are two issues here. First of all, the airlines who are responsible for checking travel documents ought to be able to access the Interpol database. There's no reason why they shouldn't.
Yes.
If I lose my credit card today, within 1 minute I can prevent it being used anywhere in the world.
Yes.
But if I lose my passport, technically somebody could continue using it for possibly up to 10 years. The other thing is that aviation security agencies need to stop working in silos. At the moment you've got the police, you've got immigration, you've got airport security, the airlines, the airports, and none of them communicate with each other. It's almost like a bit of a turf war. And the screeners really have to have some information about the people they're checking. At the moment, an airport security checkpoint is simply a way of trying to verify whether we're carrying prohibited items. The gun, the grenade, the knife. But they're not able to find out where I bought my ticket, where I'm going to, who I'm traveling with.
Yes.
There's no detail. And really, to be effective in security, we need to actually bring all of these things together.
You figured that after the hijacking of the planes, after 9/11, that a lot of these issues would have been addressed. Is there a reason why Interpol is not connected and why the silos still remain?
Well, a lot of it is this turf war, that people are very protective about their environment. If we think about immigration authorities, their primary concern is who's coming into our states.
Yes.
So, if I'm Philippine immigration, I'm concerned about who is entering the Philippines. To be perfectly honest, if somebody is leaving and they've got incorrect travel documentation, to a certain extent, I'm pleased that they're getting out of the country. So, I've worked with airlines around the world, and they've all come to me and said, listen, we've got a problem. When we suspect a travel document and we take it to the officer on duty, sometimes he doesn't even want to check it. It's extra work for him.
What was the impact of the disappearance of MH370 on the aviation industry?
Well, actually, the aviation industry is completely baffled by this disappearance of this aircraft, and you've even got organisations such as IATA, the International Air Transport Association, that is saying that we have to now start to be able to track aircraft far better than we are at the moment.
Yes.
We've seen other issues come up, such as complacency about aircrew procedures when it comes to the cockpit door. I mean, actually, the cockpit door is an interesting point, because that was something we did introduce post 9/11.
Right.
And possibly it was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, because we've actually built a barrier that prevents anybody good trying to get a hijacker out of the flight deck, and also enables a pilot that may be suicidal, if his colleague leaves to go to the washrooms, to actually lock him out
control.
as well.
Yeah.
And that is not a good situation to be in.
What kind of soul searching is going on now, and do we expect any kind of immediate reactions?
No, I mean, again, ultimately we need to find out what happened. It's very easy to speculate as to what happened. Certainly we heard from the Malaysian government that there was a deliberate act that took place on board that flight deck. Now, was that the act of a heroic pilot trying to steer the aircraft away, trying to shut down systems because the aircraft was having an emergency? Or was it the actions of a suicidal crew member? I mean, we've had 4 pretty high profile suicidal pilots crash their aircraft since the 1990s. Royal Air Maroc, Egypt Air, Silk Air, and only last November a Mozambican Airlines pilot decided to crash his aircraft in Namibia. And all 4 cases, all the lives on board were lost. So we have to look at the issue of aircrew mental health, but I'm sure it is very painful for the relatives of the pilots of MH370 to have to hear this debate play out.
So you've talked about 2 lessons, right? I mean, or 3, including the pilots, the security, getting rid of silos, and then Interpol connected in. Any other points?
Well, after every single aviation security related issue, I feel I hark back to the same line. Until we start to be intelligent about airport security, until we start to profile passengers, we're really not going to address the problems that we face.
So when you say profiling passengers,
when
that's
I say
a tricky issue.
I know some people think it's a bit of a swear word. Some people think that I'm talking about racially profiling. I am not talking about racial profiling. I am talking about determining the baseline behavior that you expect on any flight, on any given day of the week. What do you normally expect from your holiday makers? What do you normally expect from your business travelers? And looking at people's appearance, their behavior, their dress, their clothing, the way they bought their ticket, their previous travel history, and actually determining whether or not somebody is meeting your baseline expectations. The vast majority of people, when they check in for flights, meet our baseline expectations.
Yes.
The ones that don't is who we should be focusing on.
That should be red
but
flag.
we don't do that.
Why?
Because there seems to be this bizarre feeling that we should treat everybody the same, and that's just not good security. Immigration don't do that. Customs don't do that. Every time I get off a flight, and every time any of your viewers get off flights, they are profiled by immigration authorities, by customs agencies, and they find people doing things wrong, but they don't screen everybody the same way.
Yes.
They differentiate. And for some reason, we're not allowed to do that when it comes to airport security. Police do it in our daily lives. We do it when we are socializing.
Yep.
We profile people. We evaluate. We have that gut feeling when something's wrong. And yet we don't allow people that are responsible for our lives when we get on aeroplanes to do that. And that is intrinsically wrong.
I'm about to get on a plane. You're scaring me a little bit.
I'm flying as well.
What about Malaysia Airlines itself? How would you assess the way Malaysia Airlines handled this entire crisis?
Okay, I have a degree of sympathy for the management of Malaysian Airlines. I have a huge degree of sympathy for the Malaysian government and the Malaysian people. However, I think it is fairly common knowledge that the aviation industry generally is not particularly impressed with the way this situation was handled. We are in uncharted territory to have an aircraft that has disappeared for a month.
Yeah.
But in the immediate aftermath of the loss of MH370, there was a lot of information, misinformation, confusion, which has actually led to the anger that we've seen, particularly amongst the relatives and friends of those on board, but also from other states.
Yes.
I mean, if military radar was indicating that the aircraft had diverted from its original course, then there are a lot of other governments that can be well asking the question, well, why did we spend all those extra days searching the South China Seas for no reason? And even small items of poor communication. 2 days ago we had the latest transcript of the conversation between the captain or first officer and air traffic control, and they even managed to get the last words that were spoken from MH370 wrong. And you just can't do that in this day and age. You've got to get your facts right, and you've got to make sure that you've got one person that is speaking, that understands the situation, and is communicating effectively.
I actually flew Malaysia Airlines from Manila to KL on the day that that flight disappeared. My impression, the planes were new, and it seemed again that they were doing it right to be able to withhold this information and to get so much wrong in the way they handled it. Was that wrong? Was that incompetence in crisis management, or do you think there's something fundamentally wrong with the way Malaysia Airlines itself was set up?
No, I don't think there's something fundamentally wrong with Malaysian Airlines. I think that this, as I said, we were in uncharted territory. You know, usually when you lose an aircraft, you know where you've lost it.
So let me ask you, in this day and age, people seem to think that couldn't be possible to lose an aircraft with satellite.
I wouldn't have thought that it was possible. The International Air Transport Association wouldn't have thought it was possible. And we're now sort of saying, you know what? We have to make sure that it is not possible in the future. We don't know why this aircraft diverted from its intended course. If it was a deliberate act that was the actions of somebody who is a terrorist or somebody who is suicidal, and that doesn't necessarily mean it was a crew member. It could have been a stowaway on board. It could have been a passenger on board. You know, but it was somebody that clearly had a superb understanding of the way the aircraft operated and the way that the air traffic control systems operated and the way that aircraft were kept under surveillance. It is possible that in that handover from Malaysian air traffic control to Vietnamese air traffic control, that somebody intentionally chose that moment to divert it and then to intentionally point the aircraft in the direction of Antarctica, hoping that the aircraft might never be found.
So, as an aviation security expert, you advise airlines, you also write, you're the editor of an aviation security magazine on this. What kind of, you talked a little bit about the lessons learned in here now, but if you were advising an airline now, what immediate steps would you say they should take?
Okay, well, first of all, it's the advice I do give the industry all the time, and it's whatever the situation we're dealing with, if we're dealing with a deliberate act that was perpetrated by somebody, then it was a very clever person, and we need to be much more clever about how we do security. And that's why I preach profiling, behavioral analysis, passenger risk assessment, call it what you will, because you can address cargo security issues with that, you can address passenger security with that, you can address the insider threat, the possibility of some rogue element working at an airport or in an airline with that, and you can even address aircrew mental health issues with that approach. I would certainly urge against any knee-jerk reaction though. We mustn't allow ourselves to simply, yet again, bolt something extra on because something's just happened. That's what we did after 9/11 with cockpit doors. That's what we did after the Air India bombing 1985 and Lockerbie 1988. We suddenly said, let's screen, let's x-ray all of the hold baggage. All of the hold baggage had been x-rayed on Pan Am 103. It was not a logical approach. There is huge doubt or debate as to really how effective X-rays are as a method of screening baggage, let alone cargo, where it's usually not a suitable screening tool. So we have to be more intelligent, but we have to think about how we're going to do it.
Country to country, airline to airline, there are very different approaches to this, just in terms of the airline itself and in terms of security. How close are we to a global standard in terms of what you're talking about, the things that you are asking for? Well,
we tend to, there is a global standard that is promulgated by the International Civil Aviation Organization. There is a standard called Annex 17, which gives the baseline standards for security. However, that is very much the baseline, sometimes called the lowest common denominator. It's basically what everybody should be able to achieve. I would urge any airport and any airline not to be so compliance-based, because what a lot of people are doing is they're trying to tick the boxes. They're trying to say, yes, we are compliant.
The action is action itself, right?
But being compliant with the lowest common denominator is not exactly great security. we have to start to differentiate. We need to have different approach to security. I don't think we should all necessarily go through the same processes at every airport. Making it unpredictable actually makes it much harder for the terrorists to plan their way around the system.
We're getting several questions on social media. Let me throw you some of them. This is from Twitter, from @Estelita Isabel. What happened to the black box? Has it been found? Will it ever be found?
Well, it hasn't been found. We know that. We haven't found the wreckage of the aircraft. And we only have to go back to the Air France incident to know that whilst they did find some of the wreckage one day after the aircraft was lost, and they knew where they'd lost the aircraft, it wasn't until 2 years later that they found the black box. Now, whilst the pinger will give you 30 days approximately, it can actually give you 30 to 40 days life. We shouldn't say on the 30th day it's gonna shut down. Whilst that may only have a certain life expectancy, that doesn't mean that you lose the data after that. That the black box will still eventually have the data as to what happened with the avionics of the aircraft. What it might not have is the cockpit voice recordings of the point at which we lost contact with the aircraft, because that's on a loop and that's got a limited time recording. So if the plane flew on for 7 hours, we might never know what was spoken inside the flight deck.
It is so bizarre. Here from a contributor to Rappler at Ezra Farazi, he's a UC Berkeley graduate. What is your personal theory for what happened to MH370?
You know what? Everybody wants to know everybody's personal theory, and actually I'm trying to avoid giving a theory, because to be in this situation at all is, you'd bet against it, that you could never possibly be in a situation where you would lose a Boeing 777 and it would end up on its way to Beijing, but somehow possibly end up on its way to Antarctica. I mean, that just can't ever happen, but it has happened.
It's fiction, yeah.
And I suppose, you know what, there are hundreds of thousands of flights taking place, and there's always going to be that one exception. I guess, the fact that we were told right from the beginning, and I do think there is a strong possibility that a deliberate act took place on the flight deck that resulted in that aircraft changing direction. I don't know whether it was a suicidal crew member. I don't know if it was a terrorist on board. I don't know whether it was a heroic crew member that was desperately trying to shut down systems. I don't know whether or not actually it was an action that was taken from the ground. I mean, there are a lot of people in the aviation industry that are extremely concerned about the cyber threat to aviation.
Explain that.
The possibility of somebody hacking in to an airliner and diverting it from its intended course, preventing the pilots actually having control of the aircraft. This was raised as an issue within the industry only a year ago. Most of the aircraft manufacturers have said, don't worry, because the pilots can always override it. But again, it's certainly one that's out there. It's certainly one that has got many pilots worried. Actually, before the Sydney Olympics, which is back in 2000, even then there was concern that terrorists might try and hack into the air traffic control system, the Australian air traffic control system, and that was something that they were sort of role-playing.
I'll throw one last question from social media, which is from @Kaluxuxia. Crazy K is her tag, but what can you say about conspiracy theories regarding Diego Castro in the United States?
That's not my area.
Well, of course we're in a conflict right now. Is this anything that you would like to address on it, or I can move to another one? The second one is, last question from Ezra Faraz. Did your occupation become more in demand in the post-9/11 world?
Am I supposed to start feeling guilty that I'm an aviation security consultant? Of course, in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, our services were required. However, we set up the company in 1996, well before 9/11. Attacks against aviation actually happen on a very, very regular basis. They're just not high profile. Unruly passenger incidents happen almost every single day. And I'm very much of the view that aviation security should try and prevent any unlawful attack against aviation, be it by a terrorist, be it by a criminal, be it by a mentally disturbed individual, or be it by a drunk or somebody else with some issue on board the aircraft. We're organising a conference in London on unruly passenger behaviour this June.
So it's not even terrorists,
No,
it's
it's
unruly
nothing,
passengers.
nothing. Actually, that's the daily challenge. You try and tell some aircrew in some parts of the world that they're there to prevent a terrorist attack, and they say, terrorism? Really? In Iceland? In Norway? In Sweden? In Australia? But everywhere in the world we have the problem of unruly passengers, and some of them have been suicidal. We've had an attack against the Qantas flight in 2003, where David Mark Robinson wanted to crash the flight going from Melbourne to Launceston, so a flight to Tasmania, not exactly a high-risk flight, but he tried to get control of the aircraft and crash it into Cradle Mountain in the walls of Jerusalem National Park, because that's where the devil lives.
Oh my Lord.
And we have to deal with people like that.
Okay, well, let us, can I just say the tightest security I'd ever been on was a flight from Delhi to Kashmir, of all weird places.
So you haven't flown through Tel Aviv?
Yeah, you're right. I haven't. Let's end the way we began, which are the takeaways from MH370. What are the final takeaways you want people to remember?
Well, the final takeaways at this stage, before we know where the wreckage is and before we know what happened, definitely we need to start to be checking documents, and airlines need to be able to verify who's flying. Even more of a challenge on domestic flights, where sometimes we don't even have to have a document. We need to make sure that aircrew are far less complacent about cockpit door procedures. I mean, that even became apparent because there was one or two South African girls that were filmed and had filmed themselves being invited by the first officer of MH370 into the cockpit for takeoff, flight and arrival only a couple of years earlier, and that blatant disregard of Malaysian Airlines' own rules is something that needs to be addressed, but not only by Malaysian Airlines, by many carriers. And we need to start profiling, we need to start doing behavioural analysis, we need to start being intelligent about security.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We've been speaking with aviation specialist Philip Baum about MH370's disappearance, the search operations, the airline's handling of the crisis. What are the takeaways in this one as we continue to wait for any results in the search? I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us.